Hello and welcome back to another episode of From the Field. I am your host, Casey Ewer. I am a solution architect based in Wellington, New Zealand. I hope everyone had a lovely Easter break. I know I did. Well, except for the fact that I decided to climb a hill. It's about 500 meters up from sea level. And let's just say it's been a long time since I've done any big walk and I was absolutely knackered. I slept very well that day. It was well worth it after I managed to slowly hobble my way up the hill. I do have a little bit of house cleaning to do today, which is we are moving the slot in which we are presenting from the field to 12:30 New Zealand time, and that would be 10:30 Sydney or 5:30 Seattle time. So that's just to make a note that next week we'll be airing at a different time. So if you don't see us, airing at 7 o'clock, that is why. But yeah, just feel free. It'll be same content, same people. That'll be an awesome time. With me here today, I have Tony Fendel, who is a security specialist located in Auckland. He is an absolutely awesome dude. He's been with AWS much longer than I, and he'll take you through about the security services you should know about. And this is really a talk aimed at, startups all the way through to mid-enterprise. A lot of these principles do apply to enterprises, but enterprises tend to have a lot more unique security landscape. So there's a lot more of a conversation to have around that. But, definitely for mid-enterprise or even big enterprises, there's a lot here to take home. Now I'll hand over to Tony to introduce himself and kick us off into the content. And as always, if you have any comments or if you want to know more, and if you're just interested in anything in particular that we say, do reach out and leave a comment or in the chat because we would love to hear from you. Over to you, Tony.
Cool. Thanks, Casey, and thanks for having me on the show. So this evening, I really wanted to take you guys through the security services you need to know. There are a lot of services in the AWS platform, and I've tried today to pull out 5 or 6 key ones that are really important that I really think you guys should prioritize. If you don't already use them, these are fantastic services that you really should be thinking about. Before we get there, though, just a little bit about me. As Casey said, I'm a solution architect with AWS. Back in 2006, right at the launch of EC2, I was actually working at a little startup company making Flash games. And so I was there right at the beginning. I saw the launch of EC2 and I was using it to host some of the games I was building. And I was, right back then, I was sold on this idea of this, just being able to, buy compute capacity when you need it, not have to commit $10,000 to buy a Blade server or anything like that. It was revolutionary. And I've been working with the AWS platform ever since. And these days, as Casey said, I work with lots of AWS customers, big and small, helping them enable their security and making sure that they're using the platform well. So the talk today, as I mentioned, I'm going to run through some of the security services that I really think you should be using. This is going to focus on a bunch of best practices, but this is going to be a little bit more high level, right? So there's a lot of good things you should be doing, right? You should be having MFA on your account. You should be using strong passwords, all that sort of stuff. But that's all really important. But I'm going to go a little bit more high level than that today. I'm going to talk through some of the services in the platform that I really think you should be using. So to start off, we're going to talk about Control Tower. So Control Tower, for those who haven't heard of it, this is the tool or the service that's designed to help businesses run multiple AWS accounts and run them in a really consistent way. And so before we talk about Control Tower, let's talk a little bit about why would we want to run multiple AWS accounts, right? So most small businesses, as Casey mentioned before, most small businesses start out with one AWS account. And they often start out with one application, and it's sitting in that account, everything is working, everybody's really happy. And then the AWS platform is really good. It's really easy to spin up new resources when you need them. And so after a while, this one account becomes an account not with just one application, but with many applications, right? And then associated with that, often, maybe our company's grown a little bit. Now we've got several teams that are working in here. And this becomes challenging sometimes because you can trip over each other, both in terms of, sorry, you can't use that S3 bucket name because this other team has already used that bucket name. But also because, sometimes ownership becomes really ambiguous. And you say, well, okay, there's an EC2 instance here that needs to be patched. Does that belong to your team? No, I thought it belonged to the other team. And so there are a bunch of challenges with this environment. And also the biggest problem of all is that sometimes a problem that affects application 1 might spill over and start to affect application 2, even though that's a completely separate team and a completely separate piece of work. So what AWS recommends in this situation is that we want to split all of those applications out. Give each application or each significant workload its own home, its own AWS account. Let the teams work independently. Sometimes this will mean, you have one account, then it might have the production environment and the non-production environment. But often, like Team 2 here, you might have, dev and test and prod might be separate AWS accounts. But we spread everything out. And as I said before, the best part about this is it means that things that happen for application 1, if they're scaling up, if they're making changes, don't have any risk of affecting application 2, 3, and 4. Right? It's a much more stable and safe environment. And it's a thing that we reckon all AWS customers should move towards.
Yeah, just jumping in there, quite often I will see customers using VPCs to separate workloads or different regions, and that can also lead to a whole bunch of interesting issues, especially like, they think they're deploying into their production VPC, but it's not, it's actually their dev VPC or vice versa. And it can get really sloppy, especially when, dev, you tend to have very bouncy workloads, as in, you're going to terminate an EC2 really willy-nilly, and then you're going to bring it back up. And then if you accidentally fat finger that and terminate one of your production web servers, it can have a pretty bad time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there are other strategies for isolation, but at AWS we believe that the AWS account boundary is that's our top level boundary. That's the best way to separate workloads that should be separated. And so AWS Control Tower is the service that brings blueprints to the table. And so it's designed to let you spin up your AWS accounts, spin up new accounts when you need them, and to do that from these blueprints that we provide that give you a really consistent feel to your landscape, right? So each account that comes up, we want that account to be, you want it to be linked to however people sign into the platform, if you're, whichever identity provider you're using. We want to have a kind of standard looking network layout that works for your business, and various other bits and pieces that you want to have in that account, make it nice and consistent across all of them. It also includes guardrails. We'll talk a bit about this in other services later, but being able to apply rules and constraints to these accounts that say, like, in our environment, we want things to look like this, and people shouldn't be allowed to just change that up arbitrarily. And then also Control Tower gives us a dashboard, right? So it gives one place where your kind of AWS platform team or the people who are responsible for your environment can control these guardrails and see that they're being consistently enforced, see how many accounts there are, see what the total spend is, all that sort of stuff. That's really good. And so if we talk about, how would you get started, right? Control Tower is absolutely something you should think about using. How would you get there? So the first thing that you're going to do if you want to adopt Control Tower, we recommend that you bring up a brand new AWS account, a nice clean environment with nothing else in there. Launch Control Tower in that new environment. And so that's going to give you a nice clean space where you can, we can choose what guardrails and other constraints, other blueprints you want to use. And then from there, we're going to use Control Tower to launch a bunch of new accounts. And these are the nice Control Tower managed accounts. They're all consistent. They're all done properly. So we're going to launch those up. And then over time, we're going to try and migrate our existing applications into Control Tower managed accounts. And this can be tricky, right? You're not going to expect to do this all on day 1 or even day 2. You're going to do this over time. You definitely are going to want to build new applications into new accounts and then work on your existing applications in the background. But eventually we're going to get things split out the way we want them to be. And then eventually our existing account, the one we had before, we're going to be able to bring that in. So you can import that into Control Tower management, and it will apply the same guardrails and consistency to that account as well. And now we're in this nice space where all of our applications are separated. We're not having issues in application 1 affect application 2. And then also, of course, our teams can be given access to these accounts. So we don't run the risk of, team 1 doesn't accidentally touch anything on team 2's workloads and vice versa. And so this is, takes a little bit of planning to get here, but this is absolutely the way that we recommend that you run your AWS environment. Make sure that everything is nice and separated. And this is the most stable and secure way to do it. So then segueing from there, we're going to now talk about AWS single sign-on. So once I have multiple AWS accounts in play in my environment, now I have to think about how my developers are going to get access to those environments and how I'm going to do that in a secure and reliable way. So again, just playing back a little bit of the history here, right? Most people early on in AWS, we're using IAM users, which is it's a username and password. It exists within an AWS account. But when we move to this multi-account pattern, now we have this problem where I've got lots of IAM users in every single account. My developers over here on the side, they often, they end up having, 3 different passwords and 3 different accounts. It's hard to manage. It's just not a very good place to be. There are lots of challenges with this environment. And so what people started to do is we said, okay, well, let's put all of the IAM users in one account. And then we're going to use cross-account role assumption to assume a role into each of my accounts where I'm going to actually do work. And this is much better, right? Now I have one place where my users are. I can set my password policy in one place. If people move teams or if they leave the company, there's one place where I need to go in and update that for that user without having to go through all of my accounts. But it's still a little bit clumsy. I have to still manage all the IAM roles in each of these accounts individually. I have to way of deploying and updating them. And it's just a little bit tricky to figure out. And so this is where AWS Single Sign-On comes in. Where AWS Single Sign-On is the AWS recommended solution for this problem. This is where we think that your humans should be accessing the AWS platform. And so what is going to happen in the SSO environment is your users will log into AWS Single Sign-On or AWS SSO. They will then use that to assume those roles in the account. But as I'll show you in a moment, in this case, Single Sign-On is going to manage those roles and going to control when they're provisioned, how they get updated, and so on. And then the other really nice thing is that AWS SSO plays really nicely with your existing identity provider, right? So however you log into your business laptop today, how you log into your emails, you can use that same identity, that same username and password to access the AWS environment. And this is absolutely what we recommend. This is the best place to be because, again, all those other processes about people joining the company, people leaving the company, people changing teams, most businesses already have a solution for that. And so using Single Sign-On with that, make sure that all of those processes flow through into your AWS environment as well. So talking a little about Single Sign-On, I mentioned before, Single Sign-On is the right place to centrally manage your identities and connect them from your identity providers. It allows you to centrally manage access to your AWS account. So if you want to give a particular user access to a particular account, you do that within this SSO UI. It also can be used to manage other cloud applications as well. And the other really nice thing about the SSO platform is that it works really seamlessly with all of our other platform tools, right? So if you're using the CLI or our SDKs, things like that, to interact with the platform programmatically, SSO is going to work really seamlessly in that context as well. Now, I should mention as well, if you don't have your own identity provider, if you don't already have a solution for that kind of stuff within your business, SSO can be that for you. But most businesses that I talk to do have their own existing identity provider. So again, talking a bit about how you could get started, right? Because this is absolutely something that we recommend you do. And it's something that you should probably do soon, right? If you at the moment, if you're in a place where you've got lots of people with IAM user accounts, it's definitely something you should think about moving towards pretty soon. But let's assume for a moment, I've got my environment here and I've got 3 different AWS accounts. I've got a bunch of existing IAM roles. So what I'm going to do to get started with AWS Single Sign-On is I'm going to deploy AWS SSO into my organization root account, right? So this is the top AWS account for your AWS organization. This would be where Control Tower is deployed if you're using Control Tower. And then from there, I'm going to create permission sets, which is an SSO term, that replicate my existing IAM roles. And so this can be pretty easy if you're already using CloudFormation or something like that to create these roles today. It's really easy to slightly modify that template and deploy that into SSO. Or you can run a simple script, or you can copy paste. But we're going to basically get the same permissions that you have already, get them into SSO as permission sets. And then what's going to happen is when I link my users into SSO and I assign them permissions, SSO is going to manage the deployment and creation of roles into those accounts. And it does it in a just-in-time manner, right? So if there's a particular role that no user is assigned to in a particular account, it won't deploy that unless there's a user with that permission that needs it. And then it will it will manage the creation and removal of these roles, and it manages who has access to these roles. So it's really good. We're now in the place we want to be. And then after that point, we're going to clean up those existing roles. We don't need them anymore. And we're going to stick just with the roles that are managed by AWS SSO. All right, so this is, I mentioned before, right? This is the AWS recommended way that you should do human access. We don't want you having long-lived access keys. We don't want you messing around with lots of IAM users. AWS SSO is a much better solution for you. Cool, I'm going to change tack a little bit now. I'm going to talk about AWS Web Application Firewall, or as we normally call it, WAF. Web Application Firewall is about protecting the applications that you have in the AWS platform, right? So we've talked about managing the platform as a whole in Control Tower. We've talked about managing how your staff access the platform through AWS Single Sign-On. Now we're talking about protecting your individual applications. And so I've got here now on the picture, really simple application of mine. I've got a load balancer in front of a bunch of EC2 instances, right? Pretty standard generic stuff. If my website gets popular, I'm probably going to want to put CloudFront in front of this, which is our CDN product, and that will do caching, and we've got points of presence for CloudFront all around the world, so your users get much faster responses and a better user experience. And so where AWS WAF fits in is WAF can be effectively deployed within a load balancer or within CloudFront, and it's going to apply the rules in that web application firewall. They're going to be applied in one of these two layers, or you can run it in both. But most people will typically try and run their WAF as close to the users as possible, because if we're going to have rules that are going to drop bad traffic, we want to do that early, right? We don't want to transport bad traffic more further than we need to. And then, of course, the reason we do this is because there are bad actors on the internet. They will sometimes try and do things like, do SQL injection against our websites. They may do denial of service attacks against our websites. And so having WAF in there is a really effective tool to be able to filter out and block that bad traffic while still allowing the good traffic through. And so I talked a bit about WAF. I mentioned it does filtering and throttling, as I mentioned. It's really powerful, highly scalable distributed tool in that space. We also have, which I'm going to show you in a moment, a lot of AWS managed rules and groups, right? So you can write your own custom rules for traffic that you want to allow or deny, but there's a lot of out-of-the-box rules that you can choose from that I really recommended. We've also got rules from our partners, and this is a really quick and easy way for you to get started with the kind of basic protections you should have. And then, of course, WAF gives you real-time visibility as well, so that's a really powerful way to know what's going on with your application. Know when suspicious activity is occurring, and I might want to start looking at it more closely. So to get started with WAF, again, it's really easy. All of these services we're talking about today are really easy to get started with. So this is a shot of the AWS console, and you're going to create something called an ACL, or an access controller. So you'll search for the WAF service in the console, create an ACL, and then you'll see here these different rule groups, right? So there's the AWS managed rule groups, which I've highlighted there. There's other rule groups from our other partners. And if I click on the AWS managed rule group, there's a whole bunch of rules in here. And so there's some really good ones, like the admin protection, protects, standard kind of admin pages. So if you're using WordPress, like the WP admin pages that you might want to block people from accessing. We've also got the Amazon IP list and the anonymous IP list. These are lists of IPs that Amazon maintains, right? Known bad IPs, known IPs that are being used to launch attacks. We have out-of-the-box rules if you just want to block all of that stuff and forget about it. And then this core rule set that I've highlighted is something you should definitely look at. So the core rule set is going to do a lot of the kind of typical stuff, right? It's going to protect you from cross-site scripting. It's going to protect you from SQL injection and JavaScript injection, a whole bunch of stuff, a lot of the OWASP top 10 for people that are familiar, right? Standard, common things that happen on the internet that you should be protecting yourself from. And so you can click on that. Yep.
I'm going to jump in there because I think this is a really good time. So Perry Pitch, I think is the name, he or she has asked, what's considered bad traffic? How does it recognize the bad actor trying to inject SQL before letting the request in?
Yeah, so for this core rule set behind the scenes, right? AWS has written the rules for specifically what those signatures look like, right? So in there's common patterns to SQL injection. For example, you kind of see, dash dash colon, and then their whatever select or drop table, whatever they're going to try and do to you. There's a whole bunch of patterns there that the rule has been pre-built to recognize. These other ones that we've seen here, no and bad inputs, anonymous IP lists, and so on. These are all rule sets that AWS or Amazon maintains, and we kind of take care of that logic for you in terms of how do you recognize what the bad traffic is. That's all stuff that we've implemented. But as I said before, if there are other things specific to your application, you can write your own custom rules, and you can write rules against contents in the post body and headers and query strings. Any aspect of the request can be used to define what's in a rule. But some of these rules here, the runs on the screen, we don't actually reveal to you how the implementation is done. Some of these are very complicated on the inside, but we take the responsibility for that and making sure that they work and they do what they say they do. So the other thing I just wanted to cover off is, even that, that core rule set is a really good rule set. We're looking at some of the things that it does now. These are some of the internal rules, but it's still, you probably don't want to just turn that on your production website, without checking it first, right? There's a very small chance that there's some legitimate part of your application that needs some of these things. And so in WAF, we have the ability to take a rule and toggle it into count mode, which is what I'm showing here on the screen. And so in a count mode, it's not going to block the traffic, but it is going to count that for you, and you'll get a little graph, a view of how often these things are happening. And so this is really powerful, right? So you can turn on WAF today, you can put it in line in front of your application, toggle all the rules to count mode, and then just kick the tires on it for 3 days or a week. Look at what's coming through on your application, and then make a decision that, yep, I want to be protected, and stop the counting, turn them into block mode, and then you get the protection on your application. So it's really easy to look at, same with some of those other rules, anonymous IPs and other things. You turn them on in count mode first, check that none of your legitimate users are coming from those sources, and then turn it into block mode, and then you inherit that protection. So again, it's really easy to get started with WAF, pretty low risk. And WAF is pretty cheap. There is a per request charge on WAF. You can look up on the website. But for most people, it's pretty cheap, and compared to, the potential cost of getting some of these bad actors potentially getting in, it's well worth it to have WAF in place in front of your application.
Before you go on to the next section, sorry, Tony, just jump in there. I have one question from my side of the fence, because I get this a lot. And then also Shabba Dabba has asked the question about the SSO section. So the first question I want to ask is, what's the difference between WAF and like a product like Shield Advanced? Like, why would you choose one or the other?
Yeah, so Shield Advanced, for some people that haven't heard of that, Shield Advanced is our specific DDoS mitigation service, and there's a Shield team that specialize in that space. Shield Advanced is basically a specialist team of ours who a 24/7 team that responds to denial of service events on the AWS platform, right? AWS is a very big platform. We've got many customers. So we see and we mitigate DDoS regularly across our platform. It's something that happens all the time, and we're very good at dealing with that. And so the Shield Advanced team is a specialist team, and if you subscribe to the Shield Advanced service, you get access to that team who will help you, review the design of your application, and then they also help you in the middle of dealing with an event. What we do when they're helping you, when the Shield team is giving you advice on, this is where your bad traffic is coming from, this is what we think you should do to mitigate it, they're going to do that typically in the form of WAF rules, right? They're going to give you rules that you can apply in your AWS WAF environment to block that bad traffic. So WAF is really the tool that does the blocking, and it's this very scalable tool, right? We see sometimes I talk to customers who, in their on-premise corporate environment, they run very expensive firewall appliances or traffic scrubbing appliances, but they tend to fail when these really big attacks come, right? We're talking about people who can send terabits and terabits of data towards you, right? That's going to not just flood this appliance that you're running, it's probably going to flood the entire internet connection for your facility. It might start to flood your ISP at those sorts of volumes, right? And so because of AWS WAF as the service that we've distributed around the world, we can absorb those very large attacks through the WAF platform using these rules because we run at hyperscale in the AWS platform. So that's the difference, really. Shield Advanced is the DDoS mitigation service, a specialist service, but it uses WAF when we actually start wanting to block traffic. Does that make sense?
Cool. Yep. Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. And Shaman David's question is around SSO is, what would you consider the threshold number of IAM users to have before switching to SSO?
So IAM users are an interesting thing, right? It's something that comes from the very early days of AWS. If we did it all again, we would probably do that slightly differently now. And the reason I say that is because when you create an IAM user, you're creating an entity that has potentially has an access key and a secret key. So those are the values used to access the AWS APIs. And the access key and secret key are permanent, right? Unless you explicitly choose to delete them or rotate them, they will stay the same forever. And that's just not ideal. We have better ways of doing things now. So when you use AWS Single Sign-On, for example, you'll log in through your business's identity provider, and then when you click the button to jump into the AWS platform, you'll be given a temporary session. So basically, temporary access keys that last an hour. You can configure how long they last for, but typically by default it's an hour. And so you can kind of do your work in the platform. I'm going to make an update on my load balancer. I'm going to launch an instance, something like that. And then after that, those access keys become invalid. And so that's a much, much safer place to be. If you think about, if I'm going to accidentally paste my access keys into Slack and, to the rest of my team, or I'm accidentally going to save them in a file and commit them to GitHub, it's a much, much better place to be if those access keys are going to automatically invalidate themselves after an hour or some amount of time, rather than having these permanent access keys that tend to get stuck around. People forget about them. They become very, very old. Nobody's really sure if they're still in use or not. All those sorts of problems that we see that ultimately sometimes lead to compromised accounts, which is where we don't want to be. And so having single sign-on in the mix is much better, primarily because of that short-lived access key functionality. But also, plays nicer with our other services. So for me personally, even in my personal AWS account, where I only have 1 or 2 users, I use single sign-on in that context. Single sign-on is free, right? All of AWS IAM, identity and access management, roles and that sort of stuff in AWS single sign-on is all completely free. So there's not really a good reason not to. That's why we say it's our recommended solution for human access to the platform.
Awesome. And Z Mertz has another question for WAF. This actually might be a PFR, or what we call a public feature request, which we will submit to the team. But I will ask anyway, because who knows? Maybe there's stuff that we don't know. So he's asked, why don't you send WAF logs to CloudWatch? Would it be simpler and quicker to respond to than sending to S3 first?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head if that's possible or not, I have to admit. Yeah, they do go to S3 by default, and there's a number of tools for picking them up from there. But yeah, I'll check that, and as Casey said, we can absolutely take that back to the service teams if that's not something you can do today.
Oh, yeah, I'll definitely submit a PFR a request on your behalf internally to log it as a request that you want. And who knows, hopefully we will see that in the platform at some point.
Yeah.
Awesome. But it looks like we have no other questions. So yeah, if you want to.
Cool. Thanks for those questions, and do put them in the chat if you've got anything you're wondering about. So now we're going to talk about Security Hub. And Security Hub is a service that's really focused on the kind of security checks that you want to have in your platform. So if we take, here's another example AWS environment of mine. I've got an EC2 instance there, and one of my developers is going to SSH or remote desktop into that instance. Got some Lambda functions, and I've got an S3 bucket as well, where another one of my team is going to be uploading and downloading data. And so this is obviously a very simple environment, but even in the simple environment, there's a bunch of things that I would want to be true, and I would want these to always be true, right? So first of all, I don't want SSH or remote desktop open to the internet, right? If people are going to be remoting into my machines, they have to come from my office IP or my corporate network. I'm going to run Lambda functions. In my case, I'm going to decide I always want them to run in the VPC. I don't want them to running in other network contexts. And I want my S3 buckets, right? S3 buckets should never be public. They should always be within my account only. And my buckets have to be encrypted without the AWS key management service, right? So, and there's probably a lot of other rules, right? Like I could think of lots of other things that I would want to make true. I want to make sure my users have MFA. I want to make sure that, EC2 snapshots are in place and they're being, cleaned up after a certain amount of time. Lots and lots of rules of good things that you should do. And I'm going to class these as kind of the static rules, right? All of these rules have a kind of yes, no answer. Like, is this rule being followed or not in my environment? And if it's not, it's a problem. So I mentioned Security Hub is a really great answer to this problem, right? And so Security Hub for you is going to do these automated continuous security checks, right? So you can tell it what rules you want to have and replace, and it's going to check your environment for that. It's going to tell you red or green if things are good, and it's going to continuously do those checks. So it's not like doing an audit that might happen, some big companies where they do an audit of their environment, particularly their on-prem environment, they would do an audit once a month, once a quarter, once a year, something like that. This is a continuous and real-time thing, right? We know when things that change on the AWS platform, Security Hub is going to update in real time. Security Hub supports multi-account and multi-region. So again, if we're going to spread our applications up over multiple AWS accounts, I'm still going to want a bunch of these rules, right? Like I'm going to want encryption everywhere. I don't really care if you're application 1 or application 2, your S3 buckets should be encrypted. So Security Hub makes it easy to enforce that in a common way. And you get to define common response and remediation actions. And following the theme of this talk, right, enabling Security Hub is really, really easy, right? You go into the console, search for Security Hub, and you're going to click on Enable. And there's a few different security standards you can choose from, right? These are the rules that I'm going to apply in my environment. You can write your own custom rules, but most people are going to start with these basic ones. And if you don't have one, right, like when I talk to big companies and I say, like, what security compliance frameworks do you follow, right? They're going to have an answer, right? They're going to say, we follow PCI DSS, or we follow NIST, or some other framework. When I talk to smaller companies, they often go, well, I don't know, like, we stay as far away from compliance as possible because it sounds like hard work, right? If you're in that boat, right, if you don't have something that you follow, choose the AWS Foundation security practices, right? It's a really good set of rules that AWS maintains. And if you don't have something, it's a bunch of stuff you really should be doing, right? So I'm going to tick that first one, really easy. I'm going to click Enable. And then what's going to happen is Security Hub is going to give me this dashboard view of what's going on in my environment, right? And so in this case, you can see there are 142 rules or controls were applied to my environment. And a lot of them passed, but some of them failed. And then for the ones that failed, it's going to give me a prioritized list, right? So I can see here, when I go into this view, like, what are the things I really should be working on now, right? If I can't tackle all of these issues, I can't tackle them all. What should I be focusing on? And so these first ones here, right, where it says, I've got security groups that allow unrestricted access to sensitive ports that would, be, port 389 or port 22, things like that. Okay, that's an important thing, right? I should be focusing on that. And then, hardware MFA should be enabled for the root user. Again, real simple. I should be doing that. I should focus on getting that done today. And then I can go down the list, right? And the goal, it's pretty rare to get to 100% green, right? There's always stuff coming, new applications being deployed, new features and so on. But as long as we have a process where we're continually iterating on this stuff, then that's the best place to be. And so a really powerful tool, right? And again, for a lot of smaller companies, right, you kind of don't know where you stand until you turn on a tool like this. And it may not always be really pretty on the first day, but that's not the point, right? The point is not to be pretty. The point is to just know, like, what are the things that AWS says I should be doing, right? I should be blocking public access on my S3 buckets. I should be restricting my ports on my instances. Lots of good stuff that you guys should know about and you should be applying to your workloads. And then the last service I'm going to talk about today is GuardDuty. And so if we think about Security Hub and all the stuff I talked about before, I often think of those are the static checks, right? Those are the checks that have a yes or no answer. Like I'm either encrypted or I'm not, and I need to know about those things. GuardDuty is a very, very powerful tool, but it's for the less defined stuff, right? This is where AWS has built a bunch of machine learning and other tools that can be applied to your environment to help you get a tackle on, the less defined stuff. So if we think about what this means, right? In my environment, here's another AWS environment of mine. I've got my users or my staff on the side there, and they're going to interact with the platform in two ways, right? One of those ways is they're going to talk to the AWS control plane. So the AWS control plane is all the APIs that you use on the platform, right? So when you go to EC2 and you say launch an instance, we call that a control plane action, right? That's the EC2 control plane is actually going to do the work of launching an instance for you. Then once your instance is launched, you'll be able to connect directly to that machine, either through SSH or remote desktop. You can install software on there, you can do various things, right? That's the kind of second idea, right? Well, my people are going to connect directly to my resources and do work. And so everything that happens in the control plane is logged into a service we call CloudTrail. So this is an audit trail of all the API calls that happen in your AWS account. And then for VPCs, we have something called VPC flow logs. And so VPC flow logs is going to log all of the packets that flow within your VPC at a packet level. And then, there's obviously a lot of good information in there, and that information is going to flow to GuardDuty. GuardDuty is going to analyze that information in a way that is really hard for humans to do, but machines can do, and it's going to give you insights off the back of that information. And obviously, we're doing this because we don't want bad actors trying to call into our AWS account. We don't want them trying to call into our resources. And then also, equally as importantly, we don't want any of our resources trying to call out to bad actors either, right? This is all stuff that we want to know about, but it can be a little bit hard to define. And so just as an example of that, right, this is a screenshot of AWS Control Tower, CloudTrail, not Control Tower, CloudTrail. And I've got an event here that I've highlighted in blue. This event, someone has called the API attach role policy. So there's an existing IAM role. They're attaching a new policy to it. They're giving new permissions to that role. But when I look at this, just looking at it as it is, it's really hard for me to know if that's a good thing or not, right? Is this someone doing something that's part of their job and it's something I want to happen? Or are they adding permissions that they shouldn't be adding? Is this a malicious actor taking action in my account, right? It's really hard for us to interpret that as humans without a lot of deep correlation and understanding about what's going on. Similarly, this is now a screenshot of VPC flow logs, right? And so this is logging for every source IP and destination IP, how many packets and bytes flowed between those two endpoints, were they accepted or were they rejected? Again, really powerful information, right? When we're doing analysis or trying to figure out what's going on in our environment, this is really powerful information, but it's really hard for humans to digest, right? I don't know if packets from that source to that destination are necessarily good or bad. It takes a lot of work for me to figure that stuff out. And so this is where GuardDuty comes in, right? So when GuardDuty, it's going to turn that into findings. And I just got an example one on the screen here, right? My EC2 instance with some ID is attempting to query domain names that resemble exfiltrated data, right? This could be an indication of a compromised instance. So this is an instance is starting to make DNS queries that it didn't before, and it's making DNS queries to known bad endpoints where we know that other people have tried to steal data in the past, right? And so again, I could, in theory, figure that out from the VPC flow logs, but it would be really, really hard for me to do that. But because GuardDuty is able to apply machine learning and also apply the knowledge that we get across the whole AWS platform, right? We can correlate this between all of the workloads on AWS. GuardDuty can give you that information, and it's absolutely something I would want to know, right? Now, I could look that up. I might investigate this issue, and I might find actually that this particular DNS lookup is actually legitimate for something that I'm doing. That's a possible outcome. But in any case, if something suspicious like this is happening, that I want to know about it, right? And I want to be able to know about it quickly so that I can take action. And GuardDuty is really good at this stuff, right? It's gonna alert for those sorts of things, like, you know, Tony Fendel's AWS credentials were suddenly used from a country that he's not normally in, right? That's something I want to know about that. I want to be able to investigate that. One of my instances starts phoning home to a Bitcoin registry. Okay, I probably want to know about that. GuardDuty is not going to necessarily automatically block that stuff unless you tell it to, but it is going to alert you quickly so that you can look into these things and make quick decisions about how you want to protect your environment.
Yeah, Tony, we got a question from Mike Adam, who said, can AWS detect the difference between a good bot and a hacking malicious bot? I'm assuming, like, you know, such as the difference between a search engine bot, you know, crawling your website, and maybe someone that is, you know, crawling for any exposed ports.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, obviously there are millions and millions of bots on the internet, but because we're able to correlate the stuff, right? So we you know, at a base level, we get information from Amazon.com, right? There are lots of good search engine crawlers on Amazon.com, the retail website, and we want them to be there. We want that website to show up in search results. And then there's lots of bad actors, right, that are trying to take action against Amazon.com. And so we're able to take that information, we combine that with information we get from all of our other customers around what, you know, where are the good bots and where are the bad bots. We can use those signatures to feed GuardDuty and use that to make the platform intelligent. And so it's very, very effective at those sorts of things, right? It knows if, you know, if one of your machines starts calling out to a random IP address, you know, we probably know if that's a Bitcoin endpoint or not, right? And we can use that information to alert you. So as I said before, right, GuardDuty is really powerful at stopping this unauthorized activity. GuardDuty, when you first turn it on in your account, it's not going to do anything for the first couple of days. It's going to take some time to analyze what's normal in your account. And then it's going to start alerting for abnormal things, right? And so that includes things like, you know, my user, maybe, you know, I have permission to log into the account. I have permission to create new roles and permissions. I have the permission to create other users. It's all normal, you know, things I am allowed to do, but it may not be normal for me to do those actions. And so this is where GuardDuty can say, well, actually, you know, user Tony Fendel, he didn't get permission denied, but he logged in from a new country and he created a new user. That's suspicious, right? That's unusual activity. That's the type of thing that GuardDuty is going to alert for. Similar to Security Hub before, GuardDuty is running 24/7. It's analyzing every action and every packet that flows within your account. And so it's really powerful. It'll give you real-time alerts. And then it also simplifies forensics, right? Like if, you know, sometimes you want to correlate these events, right? And again, correlating events in the raw logs that we saw before is really quite hard. But correlating events of interest becomes a lot easier, where I say, okay, this machine started phoning home to a Bitcoin registry on Tuesday afternoon. I look in GuardDuty and I can see actually, you know, 45 minutes before that, you know, one of my developers' credentials was used to log in from a country that I know that he's not in. Right? I can use that those events of interest to more quickly drill into, okay, what's actually going on here? What is the problem that I'm dealing with? And so it's really powerful. And again, like everything else, right, GuardDuty is really easy to turn on, and I really strongly recommend it. You go into the console, you search for GuardDuty, you click the big Enable GuardDuty button. It's really, really easy. You do get a 30-day free trial with GuardDuty if you want to check it out. But GuardDuty is generally cheap, right? The vast majority of customers that run GuardDuty, it works out to be less than 1% of their AWS spend. And I have to say, when I talk to customers sometimes when they're having a bad day, and it's very, very common that someone's having a bad day and they tell me about something that GuardDuty would have helped them protect themselves from, right? Like, you know, one of my developers, you know, their password was compromised somehow someone came in externally and started using their credentials to do things, and I didn't notice because they were all doing things that that developer had permission to do, but it's not stuff that I wanted to happen, right? And so GuardDuty is really, really powerful. It's definitely something that you should be running. And so that's, when I started this talk, I talked about the AWS security services you need to know. I really think it's important that you know about these services, but I want to go one step further than that, right? These 5 are the AWS services that you really should turn on if you're not already using these services. I really can't stress enough. These will protect you. These will improve the security of your environment. So just to recap what we talked about, right? We talked about AWS Control Tower. Control Tower is the service that allows you to manage that multi-account environment. That we think is really good. If you do get these, a bad actor gets someone's credentials and is able to log into an account, right? It's really great if that's isolated, right? That you can say, oh, okay, well, they logged into the non-prod account, but the prod account is still safe, right? Being able to draw those really strong boundaries around things when we're dealing with a security event is really powerful. And so Control Tower is highly recommended. We talked about single sign-on. I mentioned that's the AWS recommended way that your humans should get into AWS. It works really great for, bending temporary credentials really quickly. It works with your existing username and password system. A really great tool. We talked about WAF, or Web Application Firewall. This is the thing that's going to sit in line with your application. It's going to analyze your HTTP requests that are coming back and forth over the wire. And you can write your own custom rules for things you want to block. But there's a lot of really good rules out of the box that you can just click on and turn on. And if you're nervous about that, you turn them on account mode first, check what it's going to do before you actually start enforcing them. They're really great tools to protect your application. And then the last 2, we talked about Security Hub. Security Hub is the tool that does that kind of what I call static or in-place analysis. It answers those questions that you want to answer around, are all of my data storage services encrypted? Are all of my ports locked down appropriately, right? All of these things that should be true in your environment, Security Hub will give you that view, and it'll let you make a plan about how you're going to tackle that. And then finally, GuardDuty, I mentioned before, really powerful tool that does this intelligent stuff, right? Where it's less clear, is there good traffic or not? But I really need to know about that if it's going on so that I can investigate properly. GuardDuty is a fantastic tool, highly recommended. And all of these services work out pretty cheap, right? AWS wants you to run these services. We run these services as lean as possible because they will make you more secure, and security is really important to us in the AWS platform. So thanks for listening to me today. That's kind of the end of what I've got. So I'll throw it back to you, Casey.
Cool. Before we leave off from here and go into our training talk, if you have any questions, well, it's not very often that we get a security specialist as knowledgeable as Tony on. So if you do have any questions, not necessarily about the services that we have listed here, but any security related questions, if he actually does not answer, then you can help out here. Mike Adam does have a follow-up question, which is what service makes this bot different? So like what service makes that differentiation between a good bot and a bad bot?
I would say, that kind of fits into 2 cases, right? There's Web Application Firewall, which is specifically, traffic coming into your load balancers or coming into your CDN distribution. That has bot detection. There are a bunch of, if you go into WAF and you look at the out-of-the-box rule sets, there are a bunch of different bot detection rule sets in there that you can choose. So that's probably the first one, if I understand your question correctly. But GuardDuty as well. GuardDuty will pick up on a bunch of other related activity, I would call it, right? So if you have endpoints on your applications or in your account and they're being port scanned or other kind of suspicious activity is going on against them, GuardDuty will alert for that type of thing. It's not a bot detection service specifically, but it's trying to alert you about things that are unusual in your account, and so those can often be associated with bots.
And we have another question from Sir Maxim. Speaking of people logging in from places they're not, is there MTLS tools available perhaps? You probably know what MTLS actually stands for.
Mutual TLS. I might not be understanding the question correctly. So MTLS, I normally think about that instead of machine-to-machine or API authentication. You can do certificate-based auth on your users as well, obviously. This is where AWS Single Sign-On will play nicely with your existing identity provider, right? So if you already, today you might be using something like Azure AD or something to authenticate your users, whatever you can do in those platforms will seamlessly work with Single Sign-On, because Single Sign-On talks the industry standard protocols that all the identity providers talk. So you can bring your own identity solution, and you can use whatever authentication mechanism that your identity solution supports. That will all flow nicely into Single Sign-On. When your identity provider says this user is authenticated and I trust them, then Single Sign-On will grant those users credentials, and it will all kind of work nicely together.
Awesome. If there is no more questions, just making sure that everyone has time to type. Just at the beginning of the stream, I did mention that From the Field is moving time slot. So we are moving from this time slot to 12:30 p.m. So that's just lunchtime in New Zealand time. So that'll be 10:30 Sydney time, or around 5:30 p.m. Was it CL time? Unfortunately for anyone in the UK, you are probably going to be asleep. But if you do somehow stay up to just past midnight, then you're always welcome here. We do also have a LinkedIn group, which is AWS New Zealand Technical. It's not a very good time to forget the name of your group. So New Zealand, AWS New Zealand Technical Community. Definitely go and reach out there, especially if you are interested in not only to work in New Zealand, or if you just want to ask a question, or you're really interested to hear about a specific tool or service or anything in particular. So I'm going to segue into something like, there's a lot of content that went over there, and there's a lot to digest. So how do you get in this position where you can take this to to your company and also to your team, and actually really get them to back it? And there's a number of things here. A lot of these security services are quite straightforward. There are a lot of very easy, basic toggles that you can turn on and just enable. But if you're wanting to get a little bit more advanced into WAF, for example, there is training platforms available. The top one, AWS Skill Builder, is a really, really good one. It's free to use. You can actually select based on your role, or if there's any particular interest that you actually have, such as machine learning, it will take you through that. Was a through that step-by-step guide to get you into that competency. And you also have the webinars and exam readiness over here. And if you are in Australia or New Zealand, you have a 50% discount on the exam voucher right here. So if you actually just go scan the QR code, it will take you to that page, and then you'll be able to claim that 50% off. If you're in a much bigger company and you want to have more instructor-led training, we have a lot of very, very good AWS instructors where they do this day in and day out, and their content is very, very easy. Before I joined AWS, I actually did go to an instructor-led course, and it was probably easily one of the best instructor training courses I have done personally. And the reason why I do bring this up is because in New Zealand, and I know this is also true for the wider world as well, that there has been lots and lots of demand for in people with cloud skills, with AWS skills, where our partners are crying out for additional staff, our customers are crying out for additional staff. Like, we are helping a lot of our customers and partners try to attract talent from overseas, and also trying to build that talent locally. So yeah, I definitely, if this is, and these topics really interest you, definitely go into the training materials, and also do reach out at that LinkedIn group, and that would be awesome. Again, thank you so much, Tony, for taking time out of your evening to give this talk on security, and hopefully we see a good uptick in people turning on those services.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. And with that, I will let everyone get back to their lovely day, and enjoy your Anzac weekend for everyone that observes the Anzac holiday. So yeah, thank you for joining us.